turbulence up ahead, reach out to the pilot's planner. Back in for another edition of the Wealthy Pilots Podcast with Scott Osborn and myself here to talk our continuing conversation, Scott, on contingency planning. And as you teed up on the prior episode, we're going to talk more about what's happening, at work, I suppose, from some of the pieces that we talked about outside of work. This is a bit more at work on the career aspect. And I want to stress to people that while any one of these contingency podcasts we've done are, you don't need to watch them all in order for them to all be effective. It's not a bad idea because it kind of run congruently there a little bit. So make sure you're checking them out. Hit the subscribe button so you can catch new episodes. Go back and check out the other ones. They're not too long. We try to keep these between 9 and 15 minutes to give people some hopefully good nuggets of information, get them thinking about some things. So looking forward to diving into this today. All that said, how are you, my friend? You doing all right?
Yeah, living the dream, brother. How about you?
Doing very well. Looking forward to talking to it. And hey, the career. I mean, you worked really hard to become, what you are, right? And what you do. So let's contingency plan on something happening at the career, at the job.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, again, never the fun conversations to have, but I always feel like they're important to make sure that we're thinking about when things go wrong. And, it's funny whenever I'm talking with, some of my buddies in the aviation community or some of the other pilots we work with, this discussion of contingency planning is funny because a lot of them don't have it for their career, don't have it for their personal life, but so much of what they do day to day is contingency planning. What happens if we run into weather, if we have some sort of engine failure or whatever the case, and they're doing that proactive, and the more I meet with these guys and the more I learn about them, man, it makes you feel so good flying commercial airline when you just realize like how proficient they are in their jobs in some of these items that they're doing from a planning standpoint.
I like that. I like that too, right? I mean, you're as the end user appreciative of that for sure, right? So let's dive into the first piece of it. Let's talk about furloughs.
Yeah, furloughs is really probably one of the biggest ones I'd recommend. People just, again, it's a 10 or 15 minute discussion to just think through it.
Okay.
Like, hey, if I get furloughed, first of all, different companies have done different things in the past. Like during the pandemic, some of the companies furloughed their pilots, and then some of them just negotiated, pay cuts, and then they just got their base pay. Each airline is going to be a little bit different with what financial state they're going in. I mean, Delta's, right now in 2024, while we're talking about this, I mean, you got, Spirit out there furloughing some of their pilots, and you got Delta, shooting some record profits out there. So there is a significant difference in the experience of the end user, to use your words, for what those pilots go through based off of what company they work for. But at the same time, though, every one of these airlines has had its ups and downs. And so, there's always that journey of them buying each other up and, people maybe wanting to move from one company to another anyways. But at the end of the day, the furlough outcome is just something that can happen to just about every one of these guys. Now, it's a little different than maybe corporate life, where corporate life will just lay people off, right? Where the furloughs, I would say that the upside to this would be that most of the time these airlines are like, hey, we got to survive this time period. They're furloughing maybe some of their lower seniority guys or gals, and then they do the furlough because they want them back. They're hopeful that eventually we're going to get back to flying as much as we're flying when the economy recovers or whatever the case may be. But they don't want to lose these pilots because they know their skill level, their training, they're used to if we use Delta as an example, used to their system and used to their legs and how to bid and all that. I mean, they don't want to lose all that knowledge, right?
All so that training and everything. Yeah.
And so again, when you look at the furlough compared to a traditional layoff, generally speaking, they're getting some sort of pay. They're getting some sort of, still maybe some other benefits. They're getting
percentage, something.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, what's helpful to think about there is like, okay, if I were to be furloughed, when is that most likely to happen? Getting furloughed is most likely to happen when the economy is bad, which probably means your investments are doing somewhat poorly. And it could mean that there's other things going on too, like maybe you can't sell some of the assets that you would sell to provide cash flow for yourself. If you had a second home or, an extra couple cars that were hobby cars and you really were hard up in cash. Well, the time in our economic life cycle that's probably really hard and actually a bad time to sell those things is when there's a recession going on. Which
you're taking you're probably taking a loss. Yeah, I mean, you're probably going to have to sell them, but losing your butt. And
so, the biggest thing we really try to encourage people to weather this furlough storm, because the furlough should be short term. But the biggest thing you got to really look at is like, do I have an emergency fund? And the emergency fund is one of the most overlooked aspects of contingency planning. And this emergency fund, it depends on. I always call it the sleep at night money. And for me, I'm a low anxiety person. I sleep at night just fine every single night. As God willed it, I would marry somebody who's maybe a little bit more anxious and thinks about things a lot more and worries a little bit more than I do. So, I like to run that stuff by my spouse. Hey, what kind of buffer do you feel good about? How many months of cash flow do we think we need to have in the bank where you feel good that if I was a pilot, if I were to get furloughed and had to take a 50% pay cut for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, how much do you think we need to have? Obviously, if you wanted 10 years of your income in the bank, you're probably being a little too conservative and you got a lot of cash in the bank that's not doing much for you.
You're definitely losing money safely there.
I've never seen that. What I have seen routinely is people that have close to $0 and are taking 401k loans or taking home equity loans to bridge gaps in month-to-month cash flow while they're making $300,000-$500,000 a year. Not the end of the world. Yeah. It's just a little bit of risk. Well,
I think we've seen a lot of that. I mean, COVID highlighted a lot of people, showing people that you didn't have enough money sitting in the bank for a crazy situation to come up, right? And you got to have something. I mean, you just never know.
COVID was, obviously brutal on the airlines, but for a lot of the other industries out there, it was brutal for about 90 days, and then like everything was on fire for 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, that first 90 days could have been really rough, or even the first 120 days if you didn't have anything in the bank. I mean, what's the average? I think if you pull up the average right now, it said the average person, American, has less than $1,000 in a savings account. That's not bueno, man. That's not good.
Yeah. I mean, and most of our folks have more than that, but their lifestyles are significantly more than that too.
Exactly.
And so I think on this furlough topic, it really comes down to, do I have enough cash in the bank that if something at work goes wrong, I'm able to bridge a gap to my next step?
Yeah.
And for most people, that's going to be at least 90 days. Generally recommend 6 months. If you're a really conservative person and maybe your spouse doesn't work and your income is the only income in the house, might be good to have 12 months sitting out there. But generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is 6 months of whatever is going to go out of my checking account every month to pay bills and, keep the lights on and make sure I don't lose my house and what have you. If I got 6 months of at least that just sitting in cash, knowing that it's not growing for me, but knowing that that's not its mission, I can just leave it sit there and have some little bit of peace of mind that if I need it, it's there.
All right.
And that tends to be a pretty good rule of thumb for people, but it's not followed very frequently. And so, as you can imagine, a lot of our pilot professionals are, I don't want to say risk takers. They're very safe people, but they do a very risky job. So they're used to living with risk every day.
Yeah.
And so
their tolerance is probably a little higher.
Yes. Yeah. Very safe people, the safest you'll meet, very high tolerance for risk. So it's great that those two things go together.
And you don't always think about that when it's your own situation, because you're so used to dealing with risk, and you're thinking, well, I'm just comfortable with it. And you're not kind of seeing the forest for the trees, so to speak. All right. So that's the furlough piece. One other piece I wanted to touch on a little bit, Scott, was losing your Class 1 medical, right? So if that happens.
This is a catastrophic one for, an aviator, a pilot, because it's somewhat emotional too, right? I mean, it's not something I want to have happen, but it happens anyways. And it's not a lot. I mean, if you look up the data year to year from the FAA, it's about it's about 4 out of every 1,000 that lose it every year. So, I mean, it's 0.4%, very unlikely thing to happen. That said,
we're talking contingency planning, though, right?
It's a lot, right?
Right.
And again, with all these contingencies, when you look at 1% this, 1% that, 1%, 1%, 1%, and then you multiply all those together. If you took a statistics class in college, you're like, probably like 25% chance one of those is going to happen to me in my career. And so that's why it's good to have it out there. And again, you don't want to over-insure and be too conservative. But in this one specifically, it means you're going to have to choose a new career like right now.
Now.
If you lose it, it's not like they're going to put you back in the sky and say, hey, you got 100 days to get this squared away. Nope, you're done. You're grounded and you got to move on to the next thing. So, there's tons to do in the airline industry, but that might be somebody going into air traffic control or trying to go into operations or the different sides of the company. A lot of that has impacts to where you're going to live and the amount of income you have and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So again, you've heard me say this with every, contingency planning discussion. It's about a 10-minute thought exercise. And you look at through these, the last handful of podcast episodes, it's about 5 or 6 of these topics we've hit. This is kind of like a 1-hour conversation on contingency planning. 10
Great
minutes
point.
each one, and just say, hey, what happens if you lose your class 1 medical? I don't know. Never really thought about it. Okay, well, let's think about it for a few minutes. We don't need to dwell on this for months, but what would you do? Probably XYZ. Okay, that's cool. Do you need any other certifications and whatever the case is? Because if your plan is to go be a doctor and you got to go back to school, you might want to have a little bit of cash sitting on the sidelines to help you go through that.
Maybe a little more than the 6 months, maybe.
Yeah. If you live right next to a major airport and you'll just go get a job in air traffic control and deal with the pay cut, but you'll still be working, making good money, maybe you don't need to do anything different. But now we've at least thought of it and you can know that it's out there. And it's when that situation happens and you got to break the glass and pull the lever, what you got to do.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? So, and I like that, so going back and checking out these prior episodes, kind of putting them all together, make yourself a little playlist. We actually already have the playlist for you, so all you got to do is click the first one and it'll go to it. But anyway, just work your way through those. And you spend about maybe 40 to 50 minutes or so talking about thinking through some contingencies and then get yourself a plan in place, get yourself a strategy in place, right? So reach out to Scott and the team, check the show notes for how to get in touch with him. We got all that good stuff there for you. And don't forget to subscribe to us on the Wealthy Pilots podcast. That way you can catch more information from Scott as we put these out. Any final thoughts, my friend?
No, this is our last one on contingency planning. Like I said, with all of them, man, this stuff is not fun to deal with, but just get it done. Once it's done, most of these things, maybe you got to dust it off and look at it every few years. Most of the time, you don't even really need to change it. Once the contingency plan is in place, it's in place and you're generally good to go. But do the work, get it done, reach out if you need help.
Absolutely. Check the show notes for ways to do that. All the information is down there. Subscribe to the podcast, hit the thumbs up, ring the notification bell, and we'll see you next time here on the Wealthy Pilots podcast with the Pilot's Planner, Scott Osborn. See you.
Is your 401k working as hard as you are? Let's find out at thepilotsplanner.com to get started with your free full thrust 401k toolkit. Come see what a good financial co-pilot can do to help make sure your retirement is ready to take flight. Visit us at thepilotsplanner.com. That's thepilotsplanner.com.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.